Every year, there's typically one team in the NFL that seems to stand above the rest. In my lifetime, at least, I'd say there's been two major examples of this. Two dynasties, if you will. Those being the New England Patriots throughout most of the 2000s and the Kansas City Chiefs in more recent years. These teams have been dominant throughout their tenure as being one of the best teams year in and year out. This dominance, however, doesn't make them invulnerable to the unexpected. The NFL has a funny way of humbling even the best teams. Every so often, these teams slip up, losing games they weren't ever really supposed to have a chance to lose in the first place. And these are the exact moments we're going to be looking at today. In 1969, the Baltimore Colts entered Super Bowl XLII as a seemingly unstoppable force, led by a dominant defense and quarterback Earl Morrall, who had just won NFL MVP. The Colts were stacked on both sides of the ball and averaged 28.7 points per game that season, while allowing a mere 10.3 per game on defense. Their lowest scoring outing was still a comfortable 16-0 shutout win against the Packers. They had breezed through the regular season with a 13-1 record, and the playoffs weren't much different. They demolished the Browns in 34-0 in the NFL championship game, which was like today's conference championship game, looking every bit like the powerhouse they were expected to be. On the other side, you had the New York Jets, led by Joe Namath. The Jets finished their regular season at 11-3 with an offense that averaged a solid 29.9 points per game, which actually happened to be slightly better than the Colts, but they didn't face the same level of competition in the AFL as the Colts did in the NFL. Namath's passing attack was strong, but inconsistent at times, and the Jets barely scraped past the Raiders in a 27-23 win in the AFL championship game to reach the Super Bowl. Heading into the game, the Colts were heavy favorites, a whopping 18-point spread, the largest in Super Bowl history. Odds makers and fans alike expected Baltimore to steamroll the Jets, proving once and for all that the NFL was far superior to the AFL. But, as we know now, things didn't exactly go as planned. Instead of the one-sided domination we all expected, the game turned into one of the greatest underdog stories in football history. It wasn't until the second quarter that one of the teams finally scored, and the Jets broke through with a field goal, giving them a 3-0 lead at halftime. In the third quarter, Jets running back Matt Snell scored the game's first touchdown, extending New York's lead to 10-0. The Jets then added another 2 field goals in the fourth quarter, pushing the score to 16-0. Baltimore managed to avoid a shutout with a late touchdown by Jerry Hill, but it was too little too late. The Jets ended up winning the game 16-7, leading to the biggest upset in NFL history. In 2002, the St. Louis Rams entered the Super Bowl XXXVI, deemed the greatest show on turf, boasting one of the most explosive offenses in NFL history. Led by quarterback Kurt Warner, running back Marshall Faulk, and a dynamic receiving corps featuring Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt, the Rams dominated the 2001 season. They averaged an astonishing 31.4 points per game, the highest in the league at the time, and cruised to a 14-2 regular season record. Warner threw for 4,830 yards and 36 touchdowns that season, earning league MVP honors. On the other side, the New England Patriots had a far less imposing resume. Finishing the regular season at 11-5, they were powered by their defense and a young, relatively unknown quarterback at the time named Tom Brady, who had taken over for an injured Drew Bledsoe. The Patriots' offense averaged just 23.2 points per game, 8.2 less points than the Rams. However, their defense was opportunistic, forcing turnovers at key moments throughout the season. Heading into the game, the Rams were 14-point favorites, tied for the third largest spread in Super Bowl history. Many expected the Rams to overwhelm New England with their firepower, but the game didn't really play out that way. Instead, the Patriots leaned on their defense in a strategic game plan that frustrated Warner and the Rams' offense. The first half saw little scoring from the Rams, only putting up a field goal in the first quarter. Patriots, on the other hand, saw a 47-yard pick six by cornerback Ty Law and a David Patton receiving touchdown, both in the second quarter, putting them up 14-3 at half. The third quarter saw only a Patriots field goal, extending their lead to 17-3. Rams were finally able to break through in the fourth quarter, with Warner running in a touchdown to cut the lead to 17-10. The Rams soon got the ball back, and with less than 2 minutes remaining, Warner found Ricky Proehl in the end zone to tie the game at 17-17. With no timeouts left and just 1:21 on the clock, all the Patriots had left was to trust in Tom Brady. And in his first time on the biggest stage, on the biggest drive of his career, Brady led the Patriots down the field and into field goal range. Adam Vinatieri came onto the field and drilled a 48-yard field goal as time expired, sealing one of the greatest upsets in Super Bowl history, 20-17. As I mentioned in the intro, and as the story I just told showed, the Patriots dominated most of the 2000s. The 2007 season was no different. In fact, it might have been the strongest Patriots team of that entire dynasty. They went 16-0 in their regular season, becoming just the second NFL team in history to have an undefeated regular season, the first being the 1972 Miami Dolphins. The Patriots' offense was nearly unstoppable, powered by two of the greatest players at the positions, Tom Brady and Randy Moss, both nearly at the peak of their careers. That season, the Patriots averaged an incredible 36.8 points per game, their lowest scoring game, a 20-10 win over a stout Jets defense. In fact, the offense only scored under 30 points in 3 games throughout the regular season. Unsurprisingly, the Patriots breezed through the postseason, punching their ticket to the Super Bowl, where they'd face the New York Giants. The Giants finished their regular season 10-6, with an offense led by the stars like Eli Manning and Plaxico Burress. Similar to the Patriots, the Giants also had quite the high-powered offense. They averaged an impressive 28.4 points per game, which somehow still had them 8.4 points per game less than the Patriots. The Giants had their fair share of close calls in the playoffs, but they found a way to make it to the big game. Interestingly, these two teams had already met once during the regular season, in Week 17. The Patriots won that game 38-35, of course, but the Giants gave them one of their closest games of the year. Going into the Super Bowl, the betting odds reflected just how dominant the Patriots were. New England was a 12-point favorite, tied for the 7th largest spread ever in a Super Bowl. But the game didn't exactly go as the odds makers expected, and this game wasn't the high-scoring shootout most fans expected and saw earlier this year. Instead, it was a defensive battle. For the first 3 quarters, both offenses struggled to find the end zone. The only points came from a first-quarter Giants field goal and a second-quarter Patriots touchdown, giving New England a 7-3 lead heading into the final quarter. With 11 minutes left in the fourth quarter, Giants wide receiver David Tyree caught a touchdown pass to give New York a 10-7 lead. Patriots, as you'd expect, responded. Brady marched his team down the field, capping off the drive with a touchdown to put New England back up on top 14-10 with just 2 minutes and 42 seconds left on the clock. Next came the play, the helmet catch. With under a minute to go, Eli Manning escaped what looked like a sure sack and launched a deep pass toward David Tyree. Tyree went up against Patriots All-Pro safety Rodney Harrison and somehow pinned the ball against his own helmet, making one of the most incredible catches in NFL history. The play kept the Giants' drive alive and brought them within striking distance. A few plays later, Manning found Plaxico Burress in the end zone for the game-winning touchdown. With just 35 seconds left, the Giants sealed one of the greatest upsets in sports history, taking down the undefeated Patriots 17-4 on the biggest stage. Now, I figured you've heard of those last 2 games because they're some of the biggest games in NFL history, and I wanted to include some more that you might not have heard of, but I wanted to go in depth on those games because they're the only ones that happened in the Super Bowl that had big point spreads of like 12, 14, and 18. So I'm not going to go in depth on these ones I'm about to talk about, but I still wanted to include them because they're massive upsets that you probably haven't heard of, so I figured I'd go over them still. Alright, so the biggest upset of all time in any game was the first one we talked about, the 18-point spread between the Colts and the Jets, where the Jets, of course, won. The next largest was in Week 15, 2020. The Rams were favored to beat the Jets by 17.5, but the Jets ended up winning 23-10, giving them their first win of the year. In 1995, Week 7, the Cowboys were favored to beat the Redskins 17.5, and they also lost, of course, 24-17. In 2018, Week 3, the Vikings were favored over the Bills by 16.5, when they eventually lost to rookie Josh Allen 27-6. The next largest was the Pats-Rams game we talked about earlier, with the 14-point spread. Next, in 1997, we have the Broncos favored over the Jags by 12.5 points in the AFC Divisional Playoff game, where the Jags eventually won 30-27. And again, we see the Vikings, who were this time favored by only 11 points over the Falcons in the 1999 NFC Championship game. Falcons eventually ended up winning the game 30-27 in overtime, sending them to their first Super Bowl ever. And that caps it off. Some of the biggest upsets in NFL history, based off their point spreads, of course. These games are really shocking to watch. Teams that just seem so dominant don't look like they have a chance to lose, but of course they did. Anything can happen on any given Sunday, of course. But yeah, so that's gonna wrap up the video. If you liked, please consider liking, subscribing, and if you like talking about or listening about these not so talked about ideas, of course this one is a bit more popular than the ones I talked about previously, but if you like listening to these, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.